In the annals of history, few tales are as chilling as that of Elizabeth Baie, a woman whose insatiable vanity drove her to commit unspeakable acts in pursuit of eternal youth. The backdrop of 16th century Hungary, a time when superstition and pseudo-science intermingled, set the stage for Elizabeth's descent into madness. Her story begins with a twisted myth that virgin blood could stave off the ravages of time, a belief that found fertile ground in an era obsessed with beauty and eternal life. The 16th century was a period marked by a fervent pursuit of beauty and youth. Noble families across Europe were entrenched in a culture that revered physical appearance as a symbol of status and power. The belief that virgin blood could grant eternal youth was not an isolated superstition, but a reflection of the era's fascination with alchemy and the metaphysical. This myth, though grotesque, was entwined with the nobility's desperation to maintain their allure. Elizabeth Baie, a figure of immense power and privilege, became captivated by this belief. In a world where aging was feared and beauty was worshipped, the promise of eternal youth was intoxicating. Her aristocratic background only fueled her determination, as she was accustomed to obtaining whatever she desired. Elizabeth's actions, though monstrous, were rooted in the societal values of her time, where myths and pseudo-science often guided the actions of the elite. Born into one of Hungary's most powerful families in 1560, Elizabeth Baie was surrounded by opulence and influence from an early age. Her family's connections to European royalty provided her with a life of privilege and power. The structure of Hungarian aristocracy afforded Elizabeth a position of authority over vast estates and numerous subjects. Women in noble families, while expected to uphold certain virtues, wielded significant influence within their households. Elizabeth's upbringing was shaped by the expectations placed on noble women during the Renaissance. Her status insulated her from the repercussions of her actions, allowing her to commit atrocities with impunity. The Baie family was notorious for their cruelty and political machinations, a legacy that Elizabeth would continue in her own reign of terror. Elizabeth's childhood was steeped in violence and brutality. Growing up in a household where public executions and torture were commonplace, she was exposed to a culture that glorified cruelty. The psychological impact of such an environment cannot be understated. Witnessing acts of violence from a young age likely desensitized Elizabeth, normalizing the brutality that would define her later actions. Her fascination with suffering, even as a child, foreshadowed the sadistic tendencies that would emerge in adulthood. This environment, coupled with her family's dark reputation, shaped Elizabeth's worldview. She grew up believing that strength was synonymous with cruelty, a belief that would have dire consequences for her victims. At the age of 11, Elizabeth was betrothed to Ferenc Nadasdy, a Hungarian military commander with a reputation for battlefield cruelty. Their marriage, solidified in 1575, was a union of power and brutality. Nadasdy, known as the Black Knight, was infamous for his ruthless tactics against Ottoman forces, often employing methods of torture and impalement. His influence on Elizabeth cannot be overstated. The dynamics of their relationship were complex, with Elizabeth learning from Nadasdy's cruel practices. While marriage alliances were common in aristocratic families, this union was particularly malevolent. Their shared interest in inflicting pain bonded them, with Nadasdy reportedly teaching Elizabeth new torture techniques during his visits home. Elizabeth, however, was not content to merely emulate her husband. She began to innovate, developing her own methods of torture that were deeply personal and sadistic. Elizabeth's sadistic tendencies evolved over time, driven by a desire for control and power. Initially, she experimented with torture on her servants, claiming it was punishment for minor infractions. Her methods were brutal, with even the slightest mistake resulting in severe punishment. After Nadasdy's death in 1604, Elizabeth's reign of terror intensified. Freed from any oversight, she expanded her horrific practices, turning her castle into a house of horrors. Her servants, complicit in her crimes, facilitated her sadistic experiments. The power dynamics within her household were skewed, with Elizabeth ruling through fear and intimidation. Her methods became increasingly systematic, reflecting a calculated cruelty that was both terrifying and efficient. The remote location of Elizabeth's castle provided the perfect setting for her atrocities. Secluded from the scrutiny of authorities, she conducted her horrific acts with little fear of intervention. Her victims, often young girls from neighboring villages, had limited options for escape or justice. The geographical isolation of Hungarian estates, coupled with the challenges of 16th-century law enforcement, allowed Elizabeth to operate with impunity. Castles, symbols of power and control, became prisons for her victims. Elizabeth's ability to evade detection for so long is a testament to the societal structures that enabled her. Her story is a chilling reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the vulnerability of those without protection. Elizabeth's eventual downfall came when rumors of her crimes reached the Hungarian authorities. The investigation and trial that followed shocked European society, revealing the extent of her atrocities. Despite her noble status, Elizabeth was held accountable for her actions, though her punishment was relatively lenient by modern standards. Her story has been mythologized over the centuries, with Elizabeth becoming a symbol of evil and excess. The cultural memory of her crimes continues to captivate and horrify, serving as a cautionary tale of the dark side of human nature. Comparisons to other infamous historical figures only highlight the unique horror of Elizabeth's actions. Her legacy is a haunting reminder of the capacity for cruelty that exists within us all, a testament to the dangers of unchecked ambition and the corrupting influence of power. In the end, Elizabeth Baie's story is one of vanity, cruelty, and a desperate pursuit of eternal youth at any cost. It is a narrative that forces us to confront the darkest aspects of humanity and the lengths to which we will go to satisfy our desires. Elizabeth Baie's systematic approach to recruiting her victims was as ingenious as it was insidious. In an era where opportunities were scarce for the rural peasantry, she exploited these vulnerabilities with chilling precision. Her network of servants, loyal and cunning, played a crucial role in this dark enterprise. They would travel to nearby villages, painting a picture of prosperity and opportunity to desperate families. The promise of employment at the castle was tantalizing. Good pay, warm beds, and regular meals were luxuries beyond the reach of many peasant families. For parents struggling to feed and clothe their children, such offers were a godsend. In this way, Elizabeth's recruiters were often met with gratitude, not suspicion. The families who sent their daughters to the castle did so with hope, unaware of the fate that awaited them. They had no inkling that they were unwittingly sacrificing their children to a woman who viewed human life as a mere resource for her macabre experiments. Once these young girls crossed into the confines of the castle, they were trapped in a meticulously crafted snare from which there was no return. Perched atop a remote hill, Elizabeth's castle was both fortress and prison. Its strategic location and the surrounding dense forests created a natural barrier, isolating it from the outside world. This isolation was compounded by Elizabeth's control over the region. The lands for miles around were under her dominion, rendering any thought of escape futile. The castle's architecture was designed to intimidate and ensnare. Thick stone walls, heavy iron gates, and a labyrinthine layout ensured that once inside, escape was virtually impossible. The guards, fiercely loyal to Elizabeth, patrolled the grounds with vigilance. Even if a victim managed to slip past these physical barriers, the vast, uncharted forests awaited them, a wilderness where the only hope was to hide from predators both human and animal. The psychological impact of this inescapability was profound. The victims, once hopeful for a better future, found themselves in a nightmare from which there was no waking. Elizabeth's torture chamber was a testament to her sadistic ingenuity. Designed to maximize suffering, it was filled with devices that inflicted unimaginable pain while prolonging life, an unholy marriage of brutality and science. Elizabeth viewed torture as an art form, a dark science that required precision and creativity. She invented her own methods, pushing the boundaries of human endurance. Her cruelty knew no bounds. Victims were subjected to horrific treatments, such as being forced to stand naked in the snow until their bodies were numb with cold, only to have boiling water poured over them to sear their skin. Elizabeth meticulously documented these acts, noting variables and outcomes as though conducting a grotesque experiment. Her approach was chillingly methodical, akin to a scholar studying a complex problem. Her aim was not just to inflict pain, but to understand it, to master it. Elizabeth's obsession with blood and its supposed rejuvenating properties was the cornerstone of her madness. The belief in blood as a source of vitality was not new in the 16th century. Blood was considered the life force, essential for health and vigor. Elizabeth seized this concept and twisted it to her own ends. Her initial belief that blood could restore youth began with an observation, real or imagined, that her skin appeared softer after being touched by blood. This observation sparked an obsession. Convinced she had discovered the secret to eternal youth, Elizabeth embarked on a campaign of terror to harvest the blood she believed necessary for her rituals. The transition from sporadic torture to systematic bloodletting was gradual but inexorable. Elizabeth's vanity drove her to new extremes. She would scrutinize her reflection for signs of aging, each wrinkle a personal affront, each gray hair a call to action. Her rituals became increasingly elaborate and precise. Victims were blood with clinical efficiency, suspended and drained like livestock. Elizabeth would bathe in the still, warm blood, believing its heat enhanced its restorative properties. She even drank the blood of particularly young victims, convinced it would work from within. This gruesome practice was not merely a ritual but an addiction, a desperate attempt to stave off the inevitability of time. Elizabeth did not operate alone. Her inner circle was composed of servants who facilitated her monstrous acts. Some were driven by fear of their mistress, others perhaps by a shared sadistic thrill. Together, they formed a murder factory, with Elizabeth as its ruthless overseer. These accomplices were integral to the operation. They recruited new victims, assisted in the torture and bloodletting, and disposed of the bodies. This network of complicity ensured the smooth running of Elizabeth's ghastly enterprise. The psychology of these accomplices is a study in itself. Were they victims of circumstance, forced to participate out of fear, or did they share in Elizabeth's perverse enjoyment of cruelty? The efficiency of their operations is reminiscent of modern criminal enterprises, a chilling testament to the depths of human depravity. The disposal of bodies was as calculated as the murders themselves. Elizabeth's castle grounds became a graveyard. Bodies were buried in shallow graves, thrown into rivers, or left in the forests to be consumed by wildlife. The sheer number of victims, some estimates suggest over 600, necessitated such methods. These practices had profound implications for the surrounding areas. The environmental impact of so many decomposing bodies was significant, affecting the local ecosystem. Yet, astonishingly, Elizabeth's activities went largely unchecked for years. The fear she instilled in the local population, coupled with her social standing, rendered her untouchable, a specter of death whose actions were shrouded in a cloak of silence. As Elizabeth's obsession grew, so did her madness. Her fixation on youth and beauty became an all-consuming addiction. Every ritual, every act of violence, was a desperate attempt to maintain her illusion of eternal youth. This descent into madness was compounded by the medieval beliefs that she had so grotesquely warped to justify her actions. Elizabeth's mind became a battleground of vanity, power, and cruelty, each feeding off the other in a vicious cycle. Her behavior grew increasingly erratic, her decisions driven by paranoia and a fear of aging that bordered on the pathological. In her quest for youth, she lost her humanity. What remained was a hollow shell, a woman consumed by her own darkness. The legacy of Elizabeth Baie is a complex tapestry of fact and legend. Her story has been told and retold, a narrative that blurs the line between history and mythology. The sheer scale of her crimes has ensured her a place in history as one of its most notorious figures. Yet, the challenge lies in separating the woman from the myth. Elizabeth's story forces us to confront the darkest aspects of human nature, the capacity for cruelty and the dangers of unchecked ambition. Her life and actions remain a subject of fascination, a cautionary tale of power's corrupting influence and the lengths to which one will go to satisfy their darkest desires. As we delve deeper into her story, we are reminded of the thin veneer of civilization that separates humanity from savagery. Elizabeth Baie's obsession with youth and immortality was as dark as it was profound. Her belief in the rejuvenating properties of virgin blood was not an isolated delusion, but part of a broader historical tapestry. Throughout history, the elite have indulged in bizarre and often grotesque practices to defy the natural process of aging. In the 16th century, where Elizabeth's story unfolds, these practices were steeped in a rich backdrop of superstition and pseudo-science. Blood rituals were not unheard of among European nobility, who often indulged in the macabre under the guise of maintaining health and beauty. Elizabeth took these practices to sinister extremes. The accounts of her bathing in the blood of virgins, consuming it like a twisted communion, and even having her cook prepare blood puddings, turned the act of cannibalism into a form of cuisine. These acts were more than just physical atrocities, they were psychological, each ritual reinforcing her delusion of growing younger and more beautiful. The belief in the life-giving power of blood has ancient roots. In various cultures, blood has been seen as a symbol of life force, vitality, and strength. Elizabeth twisted this belief into a justification for her murders, convinced that the blood of young girls would grant her eternal youth. This notion echoed through history, shaping vampire lore and influencing countless horror stories. Elizabeth Baie's actions essentially laid the groundwork for the archetype of the bloodthirsty noble, a figure that would haunt literature and folklore for centuries. Elizabeth's castle was more than a fortress, it was an echo chamber meticulously crafted to support her delusions. Mirrors were specially designed to flatter her appearance, smoothing out imperfections and casting a youthful glow. Servants were trained to constantly compliment her, reinforcing the illusion that her ghastly rituals were effective. This manipulation of her surroundings allowed Elizabeth to live in a bubble where reality was nothing more than a construct of her desires. This phenomenon is not unlike the echo chambers created by social media platforms today. In both cases, individuals curate their environments to reinforce their beliefs, often ignoring or dismissing anything that contradicts their self-image. Elizabeth's mirrors and servants serve the same function as likes and followers, creating a feedback loop that distorted her perception of reality. The psychology of self-delusion is complex, involving a mix of narcissism, insecurity, and the human tendency to avoid uncomfortable truths. Elizabeth's castle was a physical manifestation of these psychological dynamics, a place where she could maintain her illusions unchallenged by the outside world. Medieval society held deeply entrenched beliefs about virginity and purity, viewing young girls as the embodiment of these ideals. In this context, Elizabeth's targeting of virgins was not seen as merely a personal preference, but as part of a broader cultural narrative. Virgin blood was considered the purest and most potent, imbued with a life force that could be harnessed for rejuvenation. Elizabeth specifically sought out girls between 12 and 18 years old, believing their blood contained the strongest vitality. This belief was not unique to her. It was part of a wider European fascination with virginity and purity, concepts that were often used to justify the exploitation and commodification of women's bodies. The societal obsession with female purity had far-reaching implications, affecting women's lives in countless ways. Virginity was often seen as a commodity, a measure of a woman's worth and a tool for controlling her behavior. This commodification contributed to a culture where young girls were vulnerable to exploitation by those in power. In 16th century Europe, nobility wielded immense power, often operating above the law. Elizabeth Baie's noble status provided her with a shield of immunity, allowing her to commit atrocities without fear of reprisal. Her connections to powerful figures, including the King of Poland and Hungarian royalty, further insulated her from consequences. The legal system of the time offered little protection to peasants, whose lives were considered of lesser value. The deaths of peasant girls were often dismissed as property damage, a grim reminder of the class dynamics that permeated the era. Local officials, whether through bribery or intimidation, were complicit in Elizabeth's crimes, turning a blind eye to the horrors unfolding within her castle. This intersection of power and corruption was not unique to Elizabeth's story. Throughout history, those in positions of authority have exploited their status to evade justice, leaving a trail of victims in their wake. The lack of legal recourse for the lower classes only perpetuated this cycle, allowing the powerful to operate with impunity. The Catholic Church, a formidable institution in 16th century Europe, played a significant role in covering up Elizabeth's crimes. Through generous donations to local parishes and monasteries, Elizabeth secured religious protection, effectively purchasing the Church's silence. Priests and church leaders, swayed by her contributions, refused to investigate reports of her atrocities, framing their inaction as deference to noble authority. This complicity was not merely a matter of financial transactions. The Church's involvement in Elizabeth's cover-up highlights a broader issue of ethical dilemmas faced by religious institutions. where the pursuit of power and wealth often overshadowed moral obligations. The acceptance of Elizabeth's donations and the subsequent refusal to act against her underscore the complex relationship between religion and authority, a dynamic that has persisted throughout history. Elizabeth's reign of terror was sustained by a network of fear and compliance, extending far beyond her immediate household. Her servants, coerced through a combination of rewards and threats, became unwilling accomplices in her crimes. Those who participated in the murders were granted privileges and protection, while those who resisted faced torture or death. This system of enforced loyalty was not confined to the castle. Elizabeth's influence reached into the local community, involving officials and villagers in the concealment of her crimes. Fear was a powerful motivator, ensuring silence and complicity among those who might otherwise have spoken out. The psychology of fear and loyalty is a potent force, capable of binding individuals to even the most abhorrent regimes. Elizabeth's ability to manipulate these dynamics allowed her to maintain control over her domain, creating an environment where silence equaled survival. The logistics of Elizabeth's murderous regime were as meticulous as they were chilling. Bodies were disposed of with precision, scattered across multiple locations to obscure the scale of her atrocities. Local gravediggers, wagon drivers, and village leaders were enlisted in the effort, creating a web of concealment that extended far beyond Elizabeth's castle. Forged church documents allowed some victims to be buried in consecrated ground, further complicating efforts to uncover the truth. The challenge of estimating the true death toll was compounded by this network of deception, leaving historians to speculate on the full extent of Elizabeth's crimes. The difficulties faced in investigating historical crime scenes are not unlike those encountered in modern forensic investigations. The need to piece together fragmented evidence, navigate layers of deception, and overcome systemic obstacles remains a daunting task, whether in the past or present. Elizabeth's powerful family connections provided the ultimate shield against scrutiny and punishment. Her cousin, Cardinal Andras Baie, was a prominent religious figure in Hungary, while her nephew held influential government positions. These familial ties offered protection and influence, serving as a bulwark against those who might seek to hold Elizabeth accountable. The impact of family networks on power dynamics is a recurring theme in history. Nepotism and the leveraging of kinship ties have long been tools for maintaining social hierarchies and avoiding accountability. Elizabeth's ability to exploit these connections highlights the enduring influence of family in the corridors of power, a reality that continues to shape political and social landscapes today. As we conclude this exploration of Elizabeth Baie's dark legacy, we are left to ponder the enduring themes of power, corruption, and the human capacity for cruelty. Her story is a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of unchecked ambition and the thin veneer of civilization that separates humanity from savagery. In the next chapter, we will delve into the eventual downfall of Elizabeth Baie, examining how justice was finally served and the legacy she left behind. Elizabeth Baie, once shielded by her family's esteemed name and the weight of her wealth, found herself entangled in a web of her own making. Her early years of terror had been characterized by a methodical targeting of peasants, individuals who, in the hierarchy of the time, held little power or influence. Their disappearances were often left uninvestigated, their voices silenced by the oppressive weight of class disparity. However, Elizabeth's ambition and overconfidence became her undoing. As her insatiable thirst for cruelty grew, she turned her gaze toward a more dangerous prey, the daughters of minor nobility. These families were not powerless peasants. They possessed the connections, wealth, and influence to demand answers and seek justice. The disappearance of their daughters could not be swept under the rug as easily, and soon, whispers of Elizabeth's gruesome deeds reached the ears of the powerful. Her psychological state, once hidden beneath a veneer of aristocratic decorum, began to unravel. Elizabeth's decisions were no longer calculated. They were reckless and driven by a hubris that blinded her to the growing storm around her. The societal structures that had emboldened her now threatened to collapse, revealing the grotesque reality she had so long concealed. The whispers reached King Matthias, who could no longer ignore the growing clamor. He turned to Georgi Thizot, Elizabeth's own cousin and the Palatine of Hungary, tasking him with uncovering the truth. The assignment was delicate. meant to be a quiet investigation that would avoid public scandal. Yet, as Thizo delved deeper, the horrors he uncovered were undeniable. The investigation was fraught with challenges. Thizo, bound by blood to Elizabeth, found himself caught in a moral quagmire. His loyalty to his family clashed with his duty to the crown, and the innocent lives lost. The political dynamics between King Machichus and Elizabeth added another layer of complexity. Could justice truly be served without unraveling the very fabric of the court that had long protected her? Thizo's journey into the heart of darkness was both a personal and professional trial. He had to navigate not only the treacherous waters of court politics, but also his own internal conflicts, knowing that his findings could ignite a firestorm of repercussions. The procedure of the investigation was meticulous, each step revealing more of the castle's horrific past. Evidence of torture devices, blood, stained walls, and the haunting cries of survivors painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. When Thizo and his soldiers arrived at Chait Castle in December 1610, they were unprepared for the scene that awaited them. The air was thick with the stench of death, and the silence of the castle was occasionally pierced by the faint cries of the few who had survived. Fresh corpses lay strewn across the stone floors, a testament to the recentness of Elizabeth's terror. The torture devices, still wet with blood, stood as grim monuments to her brutality. Survivor testimonies were vital in piecing together the extent of Elizabeth's atrocities. Anna Hedviga, one of the rare survivors, recounted the unimaginable horrors she endured. Elizabeth's cruelty knew no bounds, as she would often bite chunks of flesh from the faces and shoulders of her victims, reveling in their pain. The psychological impact on the survivors was profound, leaving scars that would never heal. The castle, once a symbol of nobility, was now a site of unimaginable horror, its legacy forever tainted by the blood spilled within its walls. Despite the overwhelming evidence, justice was not straightforward. Elizabeth's connections ran deep, intertwining with the very fabric of the Habsburg monarchy. A public trial would not only expose her crimes, but also implicate those who had turned a blind eye. The church, local authorities, and even members of the royal family found themselves enmeshed in the corruption that had allowed Elizabeth to operate with impunity. The monarchy, fearing the scandal that would ensue, opted for a more discreet resolution. Elizabeth's servants, who had been complicit in her crimes, were executed publicly, serving as scapegoats to placate public outrage. Elizabeth herself, however, was spared the gallows. Instead, she was sentenced to a life of isolation, walled up within her own castle. The broader implications of this corruption were profound. It highlighted the fragility of justice in a society where wealth and power could shield even the most heinous of criminals. The decision to silence Elizabeth rather than expose her crimes underscored a systemic failure, one that would resonate for generations. Elizabeth's imprisonment was as much a psychological punishment as it was physical. Confined to a small, stone room with only slots for food and air, she was left to grapple with the weight of her actions. The conditions were harsh, a stark contrast to the opulence she once enjoyed. Her mind, once sharp and cunning, began to unravel under the strain of isolation. The societal reaction to her sentence was mixed. Some felt justice had been served, while others saw it as a mere slap on the wrist. The symbolic significance of her death in 1614 lay in its quietness. She died alone and forgotten, a shadow of the fearsome figure she once was. Yet, even in death, Elizabeth escaped the public reckoning her victims deserved. Her family retained their wealth and influence, their name untarnished by her crimes. Elizabeth's story soon transcended the realm of reality, becoming entwined with the myths and legends of vampires. The tales of her bloodlust and cruelty inspired the creation of aristocratic villains who fed on human blood to maintain eternal youth, a theme that would permeate horror literature for centuries. Her legacy, however, is more than just fiction. It serves as a chilling reminder of the darkness that can reside within humanity and the lengths to which power can corrupt. The evolution of vampire myths owes much to Elizabeth's story. Her portrayal as a monstrous figure in literature and media reflects society's fascination and fear of those who wield power without consequence. Her story remains a potent symbol in the horror genre, a testament to the enduring allure of aristocratic villains. The story of Elizabeth Baie is not just a relic of the past. It is a cautionary tale that echoes through history, reminding us of the dangers of unchecked power and the systemic failures that allow it to flourish. Similar patterns of abuse and corruption persist in modern times as powerful individuals continue to evade justice for their crimes. Case studies of contemporary parallels reveal a disturbing trend of history repeating itself. Whether it's corporate malfeasance, political corruption, or social injustices, the same issues that plagued Elizabeth's time continue to manifest today. To address these issues, society must confront the systemic problems that enable such abuses. Strategies for preventing historical repetition include strengthening accountability, promoting transparency, and ensuring that justice is served without fear or favor. In reflecting on Elizabeth's story, we are compelled to consider what lessons we have truly learned and what steps we must take to prevent such horrors from occurring again. In the next chapter, we will explore the broader impact of Elizabeth's story on cultural narratives and how her legacy continues to shape our understanding of power and morality. Her story serves as a reminder that history, while often a record of past events, is also a guide for shaping a more just and equitable future.